All right. So in the 5th grade, we do something called close reading with annotations. And we'll do this a lot throughout the year, but I just wanted to let you know kind of what it means today. And I'm going to show you what it means when we read this article. So obviously, close reading, right? That means I am reading it closely, or another word would be a very careful reading. So in this case, for this article, we just talked about, I am looking for the main idea. So that means, what is this article mostly about? So I'm going to be looking really, really closely to try and understand what is this article about. One way we help ourselves do that is by making annotations. So basically what this word means is taking notes. So you'll see today while I'm reading, I'm going to read very carefully and I'm going to take notes. And that's all that close reading with annotations means. So again, we're looking for the main idea, which means what is this article mostly about? And I know that we just went over some strategies you can use to find the main idea, which include looking at the title, looking at different headings. Here's one of them. You can just barely see creators. The title is A Brilliant Plan for Living. So I know brilliant, that means a good thing. So I'm going to take a note of that because that might be important later. Right now I have no idea what it means, but I think it's going to be important later. On the next page, I'm going to look at the other headings. So we know it's going to be about how they live brilliantly, which means how they live well. The other heading is about gifts. And then the last one is about men and women. So I'm assuming I'm going to learn about something about maybe how they give gifts. I'm not really sure. And something about men and women, maybe how they live, since it's about their brilliant plan for living. Okay? So we're going to go ahead and start reading. Please open up in your workbook to Handout 2A if you are not already there, which you should be. So Handout 2A, and we're going to do a close reading together. So while I am reading, make sure you are making the same notes that I am. So you can even go ahead at the top and write main idea. That way you know what we're focused on while we're reading, because good readers stay focused and know what they're looking for. The Indian Country 1800. Now I'm thinking, as a reader, we just learned about Lewis and Clark, and they went on their expedition in 1803. That's when Thomas Jefferson asked them to. So this, I know, I'm going to take a note, and you are too. This is before Lewis and Clark. So I'm going to be learning about the Indians and their brilliant way of living before Lewis and Clark went on their journey. So I already know a lot about this article, and I haven't even read yet. The people of the Corps of Discovery. Now I'm remembering too, yesterday or a couple days ago, we read about the Corps of Discovery. This is the group that went with Lewis and Clark. So I'm just going to put L and C's group. The people of Lewis and Clark's group encountered or met on their 2.5-year round-trip journey to the Pacific Ocean belonged to well-ordered communities. I think they missed some words. So the people of the Corps of Discovery encountered on their 2.5-year journey to the Pacific. This should say people who belonged to well-ordered communities. So that would be a good thing, right? So they met people who belonged to communities that were well-organized. While not a country in the European sense, the region of the Americas traversed or traveled. This is another thing good readers do. You can change words so you understand them more easily. So traveled 2 centuries ago, was bound together, that means tied together, by common values and customs. Okay, so I'm thinking as a good reader right now, what did I just learn about the Indians and their brilliant plan for living? So I'm going to pause for a minute, and you can go ahead and put in the chat, what did you learn about their brilliant way of living? What were their communities like? What did they have in common? Okay. In 1800, the Native American communities in the Missouri and Columbia River regions, so I know from what we learned, this is in the West, right? So where Lewis and Clark traveled to. These places were prosperous and thriving. So I'm going to underline that because that gives me a detail to know their communities were doing good, right? To prosper and thrive, if I say I am thriving, that means I'm doing great. So their communities were doing really, really well. They knew how to take advantage of the abundant natural resources around them. Okay, so I'm going to underline that because that tells me one way or one reason how they were thriving, right? Because they have many natural resources. They also had social structures to educate their children. So that's good, right? Their children got education, so that's another reason they were thriving. They could take care of their elderly. That's a good thing. And they could prevent and resolve community conflicts. They must have had paths and packs just like us. As Frederick Baker has commented, they didn't even need schools, police, jails, or social workers because they had a brilliant plan for living. So there's that word again. So I'm going to pause again and now put in the chat another thing you learned about the Native American communities. What were they like? All right, we're going to go on to read heading 1, creators. And so I'm going to remind myself, I am trying to find the main idea. So what the article is mostly about. And so far, I think the title really gave it away, right? It's mostly about how the Indians had a great way of living. Okay, so I'm going to put a question mark by this. I think this might be the main idea, but I'm going to put question marks. So I think it might be that the Indians had a great way of living. Because so far, all it's been telling us is really great things that they had. All right, like what we numbered, which you should number as well. You should be making these annotations or notes just like me. That's what a good reader does. It'll make it a lot easier when you have to go back and do assignments. All right, heading 1 says creators. So I'm wondering, what is this going to be about? For the people of Indian country, creation was not a distant event. They believed the world was a product of ongoing creative acts involving many supernatural forces. Elders, or their older folks who lived with them, explained that the cosmic forces that made the world continued to be present above and beneath it. They told stories of spirit beings who wielded or who had, so I'm going to change that to make it easier. They had immense or many powers, and they could affect the weather, the hunt, and the size of the harvest. And they taught that creation was a complex and never-ending process, and that human beings were successful only if they acted with the assistance of the spirit world. So this is kind of telling me so far, I think this is about their religion, right? So this is telling me about their religion and what they believe, or how they believe that they were created. The people of Indian country communicated their values through stories of creation and tales of the spirit world. So that's interesting. They like to tell stories. This oral literature, which just means they told stories to each other, was passed down from elders to young people and provided vivid lessons regarding the values they believed were essential for community well-being. Okay, so that's really important, right? That just told me why their stories were so important to them. It says this was passed down and told lessons regarding the values they believed that were good for community well-being. So this tells me they told stories to show their kids their values and to make their community be good. Right? So they shared with them different stories about how they were created, different lessons. It's kind of like if you're a Christian, then you read the Bible to hear different stories and lessons and how we're created. And so this is their religion and what they believed. Okay, so I'm thinking, does this relate to how they have a great way of living? And I want you to put in the chat, not just a yes or a no, but tell me, yes, it relates and why, or no, it does not relate and why. So in the chat, go ahead and put if you think this relates to their great way of living or not. All right, so we're going to move on to the next section called gifts. This says gift giving and reciprocal generosity were central to the values that bound community members to each other and to the natural and spirit worlds. So I also just figured out something really good that would help us as a reader. There are definitions down here. So with Wit and Wisdom, they were super nice and gave you definitions. So if you ever see a word that you don't know, I would check and see if it's down here. And every article we read will have this on the very last page. So I'm wondering what the word reciprocal means. I know what gift giving is, right? They like to give each other gifts. Whoops. They like to give each other gifts. But what does reciprocal mean? So I'm going to go down to the bottom. And if we look, reciprocal, I see it right here, means involving an exchange between two parties. So with gift giving, right, then that means that not only would they give gifts, they would also receive. So they give and they get gifts. That's nice. I think that sounds like a brilliant plan for living. So they had these really, really important values to them, and one was giving and getting gifts. People in Indian country believed it was wise to show respect and gratitude to the spirit beings by offering them presents and prayers. So this is related again to their religion. So I'm going to take a note of that. And they thought it was important, right, to offer presents and prayers, not only to each other, so to each other, and to their spirits they believed in. Gifts from creators were like healthy children, getting good crops, and having a successful hunt. All these things called for a gift in return. So they believed that they would get gifts from the creators, like healthy kids, good crops, getting able to hunt really well. And they thought that when they got those things, that they needed to give the spirits a gift back. The steady flow of generosity, which means being kind, within and between communities also facilitated social harmony. So I'm going to look down here to see what those words mean. So this says facilitated means to bring. So it brought harmony, and harmony means agreement. So by giving gifts, they were all on the same page, right? Everyone was nice to each other. In villages and hunting bands, people organized their lives to discourage greed, so being selfish, and to draw individuals into a web of mutual support. And that just means they helped each other. Travelers, diplomats, and traders would greet their host with gifts. They are very giving. Their host would offer gifts in return, which helped them have long and peaceable relationships. So this is another good thing, right? So this is a part of their brilliant plan for living. So how does this relate? Because I'm always going back to what I'm looking for, right? So far, this mostly is about how they have a great way of living, right? And in 3 different ways. It talks about how they had a good religion, that they believed and passed on stories. The paragraph we just read told us all about how awesome and kind they were to each other. And now we're going to read about men and women. So we're thinking, does this relate to the main idea of how they had a brilliant way of living? So if it's about something good, then we probably found the main idea. Men and women contributed equally to the well-being of Indian country communities. Their distinct, which means different, but complementary gifts and skills were essential to the flourishing of human life as they transformed animals into clothing, plants into food, and children into adults. Each gender made its own contribution to community life. That's a good thing, right? That means they have balance. Each group of people does a different thing. Each had specific responsibilities to fulfill. So they all have different jobs. And it sounds like they work together. Working in groups, whether hunting, farming, fishing, or processing raw materials into finished goods, drew men and women together. Forging or making powerful bonds that cemented, which means so this means they made powerful bonds that cemented, right? Or they had really firm and strong, just like cement or concrete, the social unity and cohesion of the community. And if I look down here, it says cohesion means being close together. So their communities were very close and united. All right, so now that we've finished reading, we're going to think, what was the main idea? So I want you to put in the chat, what do you think this article was mostly about? What did the author want you to know about Indian country in the 1800s?